check the time code.
So, where's Jennifer? I guess we have no time limits, or do we? What is your next appointment?
8:09.
Okay.
I think not really.
Well, 11:04.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're 30-minute tapes, so.
Oh, well, I won't keep him that long.
No,
He doesn't
yeah.
want to talk that
No,
long.
no, but I don't have, we're good, so whatever you want to do.
Okay. We'll just do it till however
We're
long
exhausted.
it takes.
Go, Kate.
Like the
Bobbie
man
Wygant,
says,
sure,
the
speed
war will
and going.
last however long it takes.
That's right.
This won't be a war. Okay. All right. Well, Jordan, first of all, thank you for coming to Dallas so that we may talk about Around the Bend. And it's a movie I enjoyed so much. I really like this film.
Thank you.
My kind of film.
Good.
Character-driven, with a wonderful sense of humor, a little quirky, a little bizarre at times. As I say, my kind of movie.
Good, I'm delighted.
It is autobiographical.
It is.
So explain the relationships, and then we'll go on from there.
Well, at the heart of the movie is a relationship between the character played by Christopher Walken and the character played by Josh Lucas. And Chris Walken's character is a man who disappeared from his family about 30 years ago and returns to see his adult son, again played by Josh. And that's the true part, because my father disappeared when I was a child, a young child, and I didn't know him my whole life. And he showed up on my doorstep when I was an adult, just before I became a father myself. And he came, in the movie there's only one visit. In my life there were actually a few, but they were volatile and strange and funny and absurd and aggressive and evil and dark. And ultimately we found this kind of way of holding one another with respect, which was nothing to me short of a miracle. And that's why I wanted to tell a story about that kind of thing. Beyond that, the film is pretty much fiction. I never went on a road trip to scatter anyone's ashes with my father, and I just felt like telling that story about these two estranged men would be more interesting if I sandwiched them in between two other generations, a young boy and a very old man who plays Christopher's father, and that's Michael Caine. I also had a 6-year-old by the time I made the film, and I wanted to explore both being a son as an adult and being as a father as an adult. And you know, by having 4 generations, you get to look at that man thing 4 different ways, and that's why we did it.
In your own life, did you have a relationship with a grandfather?
Yes, he didn't raise me. My mother raised me with a wonderful stepfather, but I had a grandfather, and he used to take me to KFC all the time as a kid, which is why KFC is an ingredient in this picture. It's not product placement, by the way.
What was it like when you went to the KFC people and said, now this is what we want to do?
Well, I never expected them to say yes. I knew I wanted to be in a KFC because I wanted it to be a sort of like a bizarre family environment. I also wanted a fast food place because they tend to be physically plastic and extremely bright lit. And I thought, since this is a kind of an inward journey or an inward archaeological dig, I thought we should start in a very kind of banal, plastic, prosaic environment, and nothing better than a fast food place for that. And then chicken just seemed funny to me. A burger's not funny, but chicken is funny, so it became chicken.
When you were writing it, Jordan, whom did you see playing you?
Well, I knew it had to be somebody extraordinarily handsome, so that's where we got Josh.
I'll go for that.
Yeah, no, I can't do that, and I know a lot of writers do, and I've just never been able to. It kind of gets in my way to think of an actor, so I didn't think about anybody until we were done, and then I actually thought about these guys. You know, Josh has a particular kind of likability, which was important because his character he's a little edgy through most of the film. You know, he's holding himself back from this man that the audience loves instantly. I mean, when Chris Walken shows up on the screen, we are instantly engaged by him because we're not holding a grudge against him for leaving us. So I have this other character played by Josh has to be very charming because he spends most of the movie kind of standoffish, and he was a perfect choice for it. He also is, you know, he does this thing that is so important to the film. Not only is he funny when he needs to be, but he actually reveals this. The heart of this film is a grown adult man's telling the truth about longing for his father, you know, and he does that beautifully. So,
Christopher Walken has such a strong persona on his own. Was he the right person to play your father?
perfect. I mean, what I wanted was a guy who's done a lot of evil and terrible and cruel and vicious things on screen, so that when he appears on screen in my film, you're kind of holding with you all of these other memories as an audience member. And then he doesn't have to do any of them in my film, but they're with you. And so it's this kind of like extra second level casting decision. What we wanted to do in this film is strip him of all of the usual veneer and toughness and cynicism and brutality that Chris usually has, because that way I'm showing you a character in transition. So we sort of made the actor go through a transition as well, and that's the thing Chris and I worked on day in and day out, is making sure he was more raw and vulnerable and exposed while still being that crazy, funny Chris Walken character, but just a level of vulnerability we wanted to ratchet it up. So he's perfect.
If Chris Walken hadn't played it, who might have?
You know, it's really tough to say that, because we wouldn't have gotten that thing I talked about of that evil. But, you know, people had said Jack Nicholson. People had said we should think about Dennis Hopper. Nobody felt quite right. Chris is so serious, and he's so odd, and he demands that you come to him as an actor. He's the most non-people pleaser alive. So you really have to go to him. And since this is a movie about wanting somebody, you know, the Jason character, Josh Lucas's character, wants this man to come to him, he's got to go to him. And Chris is the perfect actor for that. You know, he's also funny.
What reaction are you getting from family members and relatives?
Mine? They're delighted. I mean, I think that the person who gets the most, has to get the most credit for this, you know, in terms of reacting to this film, is my mother. Because, you know, here I am making my first film about, without question, the bad sheep in the family. You know, my mother, who worked day in and day out, raising me and my brother, you know, by herself until she married this lovely man who became my stepfather, and was, you know, a model mom and a terrific lady, and, you know, funny and present for the family. And I go off and make this movie that is basically an homage to the creep that left, you know, and God bless her. She's just been a good sport. She knows it's important for me to have had that relationship with him in spite of what he did in the past. And my hat's off to her. She amazes me.
You have a son, and
do.
now in the movie there's an actor playing your son. What does your son think?
Well, my son loves the boy. They're very good friends now. They became friends during the making of the movie. My son has actually seen the movie in spite of its. I cover his ears whenever there's a couple times where they use profanity in the film, so I'll sit next to him and I'll like cover his ears. But he gets the story, and he gets that it's about us, because it really is about the men in my family, and the importance, I think, of making sure that a family contains all of its pieces of history. In other words, my father did some terrible, terrible things, and it was important to me as an individual to find a place where I could, if not forgive him, at least accept him and view him as a broken man with compassion. And I think that's an important gift to give my son. You know, that's my personal belief, that I wanted him to grow up knowing that his father had made peace with his father. And that was the point. And my son gets it. He's 7 now, but he gets it.
Where did you find the actor who plays your son?
At Roosevelt Island in New York. I saw him on a videotape. We were looking in LA and New York, and one other place, maybe in Arkansas, in New Mexico where we shot, we looked as well. I saw him on a videotape and instantly recognized that this kid was extraordinarily special. And what makes him so special is his ability to just behave honestly in front of a camera. I mean, he can live his life fully and completely in spite of the fact that there's something bearing down him. Most people can't do that. Most children absolutely can't do that, which is why we usually see cute, you know, kind of made-up people parading around, and we laugh at them or we smile at them, but they're not real. This boy is 100% real in every moment of this movie. Extraordinary. Michael Caine said he was as good an actor as any he's ever worked with in his life. And he wasn't, that's not hyperbole. I mean, what he means by that is you can never get any better than real. Real is the goal, and this kid came in real, so I believe that. He's probably the best guy, as good as any guy that Michael's ever worked with, you know.
Had he ever made a feature movie?
He'd made I think it was a student film. This is his first big role, but I think he'd done a student film, and he'd done some photography. He's got wonderful parents, so there's hope for him, you know. They're really grounded, real people, and they're only doing this because he loves it. He loves it, and you know, he's a genius. His schoolwork is, he's been reading since he was 2 years and 10 months. he cold read the script, which means you just sit down with the other actors and you start reading the script. And the first day we got there, he sat and read it for the first time, and his first line is, "Hey Pop," it's not in the film anymore, but "Hey Pop, how come we're not gypsies, vagabonds, and heretics anymore?" And at 6, this young man not only cold read that, but he knew what those words meant. My boy, who was a bright, wonderful kid, was, doing great work with dog and cat and, house and mom. But I don't think he could tackle a heretic. So he's a bright kid, and he's got a great future. He's starring in a big-budget Hollywood movie right now, at Sony, so he's on his way.
That doesn't surprise me at all, because I was just floored by him.
On day 2 of production, I took his parents aside and I said, "Listen, fasten your seatbelt, because this doesn't happen very often, and this kid's going on a ride, so got to make some decisions."
Was he at all intimidated working around Christopher Walken?
He didn't know who they were. He had no idea who they were. He'd never seen Chris Walken before, or Michael Caine, or any of them, which was great. But nope. No, he was the biggest jokester on the set. It was a pretty serious set in a lot of ways, but again, we had a 6-year-old kid running around, moving props and throwing things. I mean, he had this amazing talent of being a real kid, kind of obnoxious at moments. He's a real, just rambunctious 6-year-old, and I would say action, and he would jump right in. He'd be screaming at the top of his lungs, throwing props, and I'd say action, and he'd just stop, and he'd be right there. Total pro.
Would he blow many takes?
Never. He was without question the easiest actor. No, without question. Nobody was easier than him. You've seen take 1 or 2 of him almost through the whole movie. I mean, thank God. It's a very low-budget movie. We didn't have a lot of time because we didn't have a lot of money. I realized about 2 weeks in, if I had had any other child in that role, my movie would have sunk. We never would have finished it, because most children require an enormous amount of time. And the film was difficult enough that I had to spend a lot of time just getting the scenes right with Michael, with Chris, with Josh, because we didn't have a long rehearsal period. We really had to do it on our feet. And those guys, I always shot them first because they needed to be right. And then I would start shooting off the kid at the end of the day, and he just nailed it every time. I'd like to take more credit for his performance, but I really can't. He just did it.
What about directing people what about directing Christopher Walken and Michael Caine? All right, they do something, and you're thinking, that's not quite it. And then you would stop to think, how am I going to go up to Michael Caine and say, that's not quite it?
Exactly. They both handled that process differently. Michael is an extraordinary man and a great gentleman. It should come as no surprise. And he did me the great gift of convincing me that he was the nervous guy, which took me a couple days to figure out he was tricking me. But that's a classy guy. And he made me think it was true. He's a good enough actor that he really made me feel that he was the uncomfortable one, so that I had to step in and really take care of him and do my job. Otherwise, I would have been much more intimidated. But he didn't want me kind of shy or embarrassed around him, because I understood this man and his relationship to the other members of the family better than he did, as he later told me. So he needed me. So he made me feel needed, and I jumped right in. Chris was a slightly different person, and I don't think Chris is a real people guy, but he did me the great favor of allowing me to help him go to this new place. And he didn't, he wasn't as outward focused as Michael, I'd say, but he was generous enough to sort of know that he'd not done what I wanted him to do before. And I was always a little shy the first week, kind of stepping up to him and saying, well, yeah, Chris, look, I think it might be, and why don't we? And by the second week, I was just saying, no, Chris, we're not there. Let's try it. And, he always did it. And what we see in this film is a Chris we've never seen before in terms of his rawness and vulnerability. So.
Aren't Chris and Michael Caine and Josh Lucas all represented by the same agency?
Yes, that agency is ICM, International Creative Management, I believe, certainly responsible for making this film. I mean, they read it very early on and immediately decided it was a great script, a great story, and would be, in spite of the fact that we didn't have a ton of money, would be great for their people. The woman who plays the Danish au pair, Glenn Headley, is also an ICM client. I am now an ICM client. The DP, which means the cinematographer, the production designer, the costume designer, everybody, the editor, everybody on the film is an ICM client. So is what agencies can do and should do, and they did it as good as anyone's ever done it. They packaged this movie.
Were they the only people to have the script?
No, but they stepped forward with names like this. You know, they stepped forward with Michael Caine and Chris Walken and Josh Lucas, these are all certifiable movie stars. And you know, other agencies were, you know, suggesting wonderful actors who weren't at that particular level. So, and these were the guys I wanted. So they delivered them to me. So.
I'm sure you realize how unusual that is, because agencies with superstars like this want them to make tons of money.
You know, they recognize the story as something actors would want to identify with and want to play. It took me a long time to get the script to the place where it was that funny and that honest. And again, the comedy, we tried to keep the comedy within the realm of honesty and truthfulness, and we tried to keep the drama within the same realm. So we didn't go sentimental or sappy, and we didn't go goofy or wacky or smug, you know, and it was this, and that's something that actors really were drawn to, the opportunity to play real men, emotionally and funny, you know. And I mean, I was shocked that they said yes, but it's the script. It was the script, you know. And the fact that I somehow convinced them that I wouldn't make a complete fool of them or myself.
Jordan, was there any time when you were writing it particularly, and the cremation and the ashes, that's a very delicate subject with many people. Did you ever stop at your computer and think, hey, can I get by with this?
Well, because yeah, absolutely. And the thing that was most important to me is that we treat death with tremendous respect while we treat it with the way we frequently do treat it. I mean, there is humor in the grief process. There's also great pain in the grief process. I wanted to make sure that I was never being disrespectful, and I believe that I hit that mark, but it was constantly a challenge. There's a lot of scenes that are taken out of the movie that seemed too disrespectful of this you know, huge chunk of our life called our passing, death. But you know, cremation is, there were odd moments of my father when he was cremated. You know, he wanted to be cremated with a saxophone. I mean, there were odd requests. You know, people make odd requests. They are funny. You know, so definitely I was concerned about it. You know, it's a touchy subject, and to treat it with comedy at all is risky. But I think we ultimately treat it with tremendous respect, especially for the period around grief. The movie is staged in a period in between two griefs, and I think that's a very special period. I think it's a period where we are open to largesse, in our humanity emerges, and that was always the ground from which we wanted this movie to spring, from humanity at its best. You know, in my 20s, I would have made this movie really angry, and that would have been appropriate, but it would have been a much kind of tougher and less compassionate film. And it would have been appropriate for a 20-year-old to make that. But at 40, while I watched my wife and my friends' parents leaving, you start thinking about the bigger picture. And I also have made a bunch of mistakes in my own life, and I hope to be viewed with compassion and dignity as a failed human myself someday. So.
Have you always been a writer?
A closet writer. I mean, I was an actor for years. Pretty unsuccessfully, but I did it for a long time, and I always wrote during that period. And when I finally threw in the towel, I started writing plays, and one of my plays was done around the country maybe 15 times, and it took a long time to write it. And I figured, well, and I made no money, and I wanted to have a family. I thought, well, if I'm going to write a play, I might as well try and write a screenplay. So, for the last 9 years, I've been making a living doing that in Hollywood. They haven't made anything, you know. I mean, I've worked on some films that have been made, but all of my original scripts, I'm quite successful, but they've made none of them until Around the Bend. So.
Do you have another film you're working
on?
Yep,
the same studio that made this one has commenced me to make another one. They bought an old script of mine that I wrote about 5 or 6 years ago about a wonderful, crazy man in Philadelphia named Albert Barnes who started collecting art in the early 20th century.
Oh, the Barnes collection.
The Barnes collection. I'm making a movie about Albert Barnes. Yeah, he's
fabulous.
Just an irascible figure in the art world, and his collection is now worth $8 billion, and it's a collection he started gathering In, I think, 1917, he started buying the paintings. And he showed them to the city of Philadelphia, the art world in Philly, in about 1921, and they really rejected them quite vehemently. And he never forgave them. And he bought this private mansion, built a private mansion, continued collecting. And he never, ever, ever allowed any association between, they couldn't even view the paintings, anyone affiliated with the Philadelphia cultural or arts community. And he snubbed them for his entire life. And when he died in '51, he left the collection in the hands of a very small African-American college. Now, in 1951, that was an act of madness or enormous generosity, depending which side you're looking at. But the city of Philadelphia is still in the process of trying to get their hands on those paintings, and are very close to doing so. But it's about his relationship with Philly, and the author James Michener plays a big part in the movie as well, because he had a run-in with Albert Barnes as a young man. He pretended to be a coal miner in order to gain admittance instead of being a Swarthmore student, which what he was, to kind of pull a prank on this cranky old guy. And Barnes never forgave him for it. He stalked him, you know, for 25 years. He wrote him about 1,000 vicious, nasty, profane letters, and so it's about their relationship as well. It's a great, great story.
The Kimball Museum in Fort Worth had the Barnes collection.
Yes, it did tour quite a few years ago against the very strict stipulations of the will. They sort of found some loophole to get it out on the road once, but that's the only time they've been seen outside the building itself. But it did a national tour about maybe 10 years ago or something.
Will you have any problem photographing the?
No, they are in dire financial straits, you know, and there's nothing in the world that stipulates we can't make a motion picture in the facility. I personally, as the director of this film, I have no intention of there's some debate about this, but I have no intention of bringing a film crew into that place. I want to digitally photograph the paintings and put them in a sound stage somewhere. I'm not bringing a union crew into the Barnes Foundation, because, you know, lights fall and ladders tumble and, you know, screwdrivers get thrown, and I'm not going to do that around Matisse's. So we'll build a mock of it probably. I don't know. I hope so. I'm terrified. So.
And the insurance would be
Yeah, I can't. I mean,
prohibitive.
I can't believe they're allowing us to do it. Anyway, it's not official anyway, so maybe it won't happen. But I think we'll probably use digital reproductions, which are at this point so incredible that nobody could tell. You know.
But the movie is a go.
The movie's a go. We started casting this week. You know, I'm not allowed to speak about who I'm talking to, but we're going to go. The studio has greenlit the movie. Yeah.
Actors we would know.
Yes, but whose name I'm not allowed to mention. I mean,
Hints,
the performances.
hints.
No, sorry.
Any
really,
of the above?
you know what? I wish, but none of them are quite right for these roles. You know, Chris Walken would be a wonderful Albert Barnes, except there's a period of the film that includes Barnes' attempt to ingratiate himself into Philadelphia society, and he tries quite hard to fit in before he rejects them and they reject him. And Chris is just not a kind of fit-in kind of guy. I don't see him ingratiating himself to anybody. Certainly not the rich people of Philadelphia. So.
You should try to interview him sometime.
Oh, you don't have to tell me. Believe me, I've been on the road with him for weeks. I have reporter after reporter coming up to me and saying, because I generally follow him, and they'll just be eyes kind of wide. That was the strangest interview I've ever had in my life.
You kind of have to just, you know, find something that you think will connect with him, kind of push the button and back off.
Yeah. Well, I've had to interview him on. We do a lot of. We'll screen the movie at film festivals, and frequently he and I will sit together on stage like this, and I'll interview him. And some of them have been disastrous, and some of them have been pretty good. You know, exactly right. You kind of try and provoke some. You try and pull a thread, and sometimes when you get it right, he's quite amazing and entertaining, and it's a very special treat because you realize you're involved in something rare when he's effusive and outward going. But you know what? It's what makes him a great actor. He does not fool around. He is really real, and even when he's playing these wackos, and he doesn't play one in my movie, but even when he does, I said to this one interviewer, I think Chris extends our appreciation and understanding and acceptance of derelict behavior. In other words, most actors behaving like he behaves, we'd think, oh, they're being phony. But he sort of manages to make us stretch our limits of accepting that as normal human behavior, you know, abnormal, but honest and real. It's quite a talent.
What accolades has the movie had thus far?
Well, we went to the Montreal Film Festival and won a jury prize for Chris and for the film, which was the first place we ever screened it, which was kind of wonderful. And reviews started coming in at that point. A lot of reviews haven't come out yet, but and then we won the San Diego Film Festival, which is our second film festival. And I'm going to 2 more next week, one in Austin and in Kansas City. But so we seem to be winning where we go. And you know, I'll say frankly that some of the press has been extraordinarily unkind to the film, and they've been very specific about their criticism. And I take it. I try to not be bitter about it, but I take great offense at their questioning compassion as a contrivance, which I hear sometimes in the big city papers, and it just drives me crazy. I don't mind that they don't like my film, but for them to question the theme of the film as unsound is extraordinarily inappropriate, because I don't think compassion is unrealistic. I think it's something that we as humans are capable of, and I think it's something that we as humans must aspire towards. And those people who have referred to it as something that only happens in movies, not to publicly ridicule them, but I don't envy their lives.
What would they have you do? Shoot him?
Yeah, oh, you betcha. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people in this country writing, you know, film criticism that would much prefer my film to end in. I mean, I hope that's not coming as a surprise. I mean, we're at a very, and I like, by the way, dark movies. I don't have a problem with them. I just don't also have a problem with films that explore darkness with the idea that there's a light on in the back, and there's a light to walk towards, and there's another way of looking at this thing. I think there's room for both. Like I say, in my 20s, I would have probably had these 2 people, you know, with, you know, weapons in their hands by the end of the movie, and it would have been, again, appropriate. But, you know, I think the audience in the center of this country is going to get this movie in a way that some of the critics on the left and right of this country are not, you know.
Well, Jordan, all I can say is keep the courage of your convictions.
Thank you, my dear. I appreciate
And
it.
thanks again for coming. I truly have enjoyed this interview
Thank
as
you.
much as I enjoyed the movie, and that's saying a whole lot.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's lovely talking with you.
That was just great.
Good.